Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to take a look at the Maestro Omnibus by Peter David and others. Now this character here, the Maestro, came out of Peter David's long, excellent run on The Incredible Hulk. That's a run which I hold in very high regard. I've talked about it a few times on the channel. I've made my feelings very much known about that one. It's no secret that I love that run. It really is right up there with some of my absolute favourites of all time. And this character here, the Maestro, came out of probably one of the best stories within that whole run by Peter David, the original Future Imperfect story, which was written by David and artwork on that one by George Pérez. That story is in this omnibus, along with a bunch of other stuff that took place afterwards, which features this character who's gone on to be a recurring menace within the Marvel Universe, who occasionally shows up and haunts the Hulk and other characters. Now, from the front cover alone, even if you don't really know much or anything about the Maestro, it's probably no real surprise just looking at him that he's some kind of Hulk. And I'll go into exactly who this character is and, talk a bit about all that kind of thing as I go through the book. Before we do that, let's just have a look at this dust jacket then. This being the direct market variant by, I believe it's Greg Land. It's a really cool image. The other cover, which was available for this book initially when it was released, was the classic Future Imperfect issue 2 cover, I think, by George Pérez. I've ended up with this cover simply because I actually found this on sale. That's why I've ended up getting the book so late. It was one I kind of had not planned on picking up, not because I didn't want it, but there were just other stuff I was prioritizing ahead of it. Then I found it on sale and thought, what the hell, I'll get it. So here I am with this book now. So on the back then, a cover gallery of pretty much all the issues collected in here down the sides. Obviously a bit of blurb there, and the Maestro himself kind of in an action pose. That's pretty cool. Inside you get the flaps here, which show a bit of a little kind of mini biography on the creators, and another summary here on the left hand side. If we look at the book itself then, beneath the dust jacket there is this excellent bit of artwork, one of the most just iconic comic book scenes that ever comes to my mind anyway. This is the quote-unquote trophy room, which we see in the Future Imperfect story, featuring a whole lot of key items relating to different Marvel characters who in this particular storyline have all long since passed away. Really cool bit of artwork by George Pérez. Yeah, really nice use of that on the book itself. Love that. So then, let's get into the book, and as I said, go through a few spoilers because, I've got to talk about a few things to kind of sum up even who this character is exactly and what his place is within the Marvel Universe and within the Incredible Hulk story. So we'll break that down. So fair warning, if you've never read any of this stuff, yeah, I will kind of spoil a bit of Future Imperfect and other things related to it, all featuring this Maestro character. So this is a contents page that we get here on the kind of first couple of pages of the book, just break down exactly what's in here. There is a bit of double dipping between this and a couple of the Hulk by Peter David omnibuses. Most prominently is Future Imperfect itself, which starts the collection off here in this omnibus. But the two-part story for Future Imperfect is collected in The Incredible Hulk by Peter David Omnibus Volume 3. And then there's a couple of issues as well. I think it's Hulk 460 and 461. Those are in Hulk Volume 4 by Peter David. So a bit of double dipping here, but not too much, honestly, because I think beyond that, everything else in this book pretty much is uncollected elsewhere, at least in other Hulk omnibuses, and I think largely in any other omnibuses just in general. So overall, yeah, a bit of minimal double dipping, but not so much where it bothers me. There's still enough original stuff in here, not collected elsewhere, that I thought this was well worth it. And besides, to be honest, Future Imperfect is one of those stories that's so good, I don't really mind having it in a couple of different books. And this kicks their collection off because this was the story in which the Maestro first appeared. And you know what? Just George Pérez doing the artwork in here and scenes like this really illustrating why he was the perfect choice to do a book like this. It's a dystopian future, it's a post-apocalyptic world, it's that kind of story in which in this distant future mankind and the world is kind of all but wiped out. There's just sort of pockets of civilization scattered around, and one of the biggest ones remaining in the US at least is this particular city, Dystopia, in which it's quickly made apparent at the start of this story that there is some kind of leader, some ruler reigning over everybody here with an iron fist who goes by the name of the Maestro. In comes the Incredible Hulk, brought to this future by mysterious means. All light gets shed on that eventually as you go through and read more of it. But initially, he doesn't really know where he is or what's going on or what's brought him here. But it's just really cool. You know, he ends up immediately kind of coming into conflict with the authorities of this place. And here we get the first reveal. Classic bit of artwork by George Pérez where the Maestro first emerges and we see who he is. And basically, you know, just to say it now, the Maestro is the Incredible Hulk. He is a version of the Hulk who basically, to put it as simply as possible, went bad. You know, he became just this kind of terribly cruel, manipulative, selfish leader with pretty much no mercy left in him. All elements of his heroic past self more or less gone. As he came to terms with this world in which mankind had largely wiped itself out, he became bitter and angry and just decided that he was going to rule over what little he could find left. Now, in this book, we do get, ultimately, towards the back of it, the full kind of Maestro origin story. So whereas this original story was from the early 90s, years later, in fact, just I think 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago now, Peter David returned to this character, focused on him, and did 3 miniseries, which are all collected in this book, and show how the Hulk went from being basically a good guy to this very bad guy. But I think he's a really cool character. I think it was a good idea, a really cool concept to kind of show what might happen if Hulk just went full evil, you know, because very much the Maestro is, like I say, he is just an evil character, really. He's kind of a love-to-hate kind of character. But yeah, I mean, the Hulk has been a character who's been sort of morally grey throughout a lot of his history. So it's quite interesting to see what might happen if he just decided to use all of his strength and cunning to just become a complete bad guy, an absolute villain, and that is really what's going on in here. So it's a really interesting story. It really is a classic. I won't spoil specifically what happens, but inevitably the Hulk and Maestro end up on opposite ends of the fight, you know, coming to blows. And it's really quite a difficult fight for the Hulk, you know, fighting himself, fighting a more experienced version of himself. And ultimately, yeah, how he ends up kind of winning the day is really quite interesting to see what goes on there. But then beyond that, so like I say, there's plenty of other stuff in this book, and if you're interested in this character, then this is certainly a great book to get for that reason. So there's a little bit of aftermath here, a bit of material that shows kind of what goes on after the story. Then we get these 2 issues I mentioned before, 460 and 461, which, to be honest, I think are a bit of an odd inclusion in this omnibus, because the Maestro isn't, well, he's kind of in this little 2-issue story, but also not exactly. I can sort of see why it's in here, but at the same time, if it wasn't in here, I don't think it would be too big a deal, because this is more about what was going on in Peter David's Hulk run, you know, separate to the Maestro, really. It was more about other things. I mean, I've reviewed that book. I reviewed Hulk Omnibus Volume 4 by Peter David already, so I won't go too much into this. Talked about it already in that review. And it's a little bit out of context here, to be honest. Although, like I say, the Maestro does appear. But yeah, anyway. So then there's this section of Captain Marvel and Spider-Man 2099 issues, both of which featuring stories where characters return to the Maestro's world, to his version of Earth within the multiverse. And this is pretty cool. You know, like I said, the Maestro was a character who, for a while, you know, after that original Future Imperfect story and after Peter David was done with his original Hulk run, he just showed up now and again in stories like this, where characters doing a bit of time travel and that kind of thing would pop into his world and end up having a fight with him. So these are quite fun to read. Like I say, it's all good stuff, really. But the main draw, you know, I already talked about it, but is that Maestro origin story that's in here, and it takes up a little under half of the book. So this stuff in between Future Imperfect and that is sort of interesting to read, but not really the big highlight of the book, in my opinion. But this is where we get to, I think this Future Imperfect story, yeah, this was part of Secret Wars. I think the 2015 Secret Wars story, which was all about different like mini worlds being brought together and creating some kind of patchwork collection of different worlds, all based around something Doctor Doom was doing. Anyway, so this is a world where Maestro within that larger creation that Doctor Doom has made, there is a world ruled over by Maestro, and he is trying to basically take over everything. It's an interesting story, quite liked it. And that's where the Greg Land cover comes as well for the omnibus from this story. He did one of the covers in here. But we get to the point kind of just after all this Battle World stuff where we finally get to the, yeah, here we go. So this is the beginning of the kind of long origin story that Peter David came back and wrote. So this is something that I really enjoyed. I first read this, I think, digitally, kind of as it was coming online and available on Marvel Unlimited. Then it got released in, I think, 3 trade paperbacks, because technically this is 3 miniseries. And now for the first time it's all collected in an omnibus. And this is really cool. So I'll talk a bit about this in some detail, because I really liked this. So it all starts off in a very strange way, where the Hulk, and this is based on the Professor Hulk version of Hulk as well from Peter David's run. So this is when it was pretty much the mind of Bruce Banner in the body of the Hulk, and they were kind of merged together. So it wasn't the kind of savage Hulk, the Hulk smash Hulk. It's intelligent Hulk with, you know, all the strength of him being the Hulk. So it's a really cool version of the character anyway. But after this initial strange opening where things just don't seem right, it turns out that for a long time he's basically been kept in this kind of this tube, wired up to some kind of computer program, and he's been living like a virtual idyllic life, and it all comes crashing down here. And, you know, the reality of his situation is that he's been kept in this lab, unbeknownst to him, following on from a catastrophic world event. And this is where we see kind of what happened to the world and made it the way it was in that Future Imperfect story. Like I say, it's all about seeing Hulk's descent into villainy and him taking on that mantle of the Maestro and becoming that character. And I think this is really well handled by Peter David. I mean, if there's one thing you can count on Peter David being able to do well, in my opinion, it's write anything Hulk related. You know, he's easily my favourite Hulk writer that I've ever read. He's just got such a great grasp on storytelling with this character. And obviously the Maestro is, you know, his creation, his co-creation along with George Pérez. So it was cool to see him revisiting this all this time later and fleshing out the backstory. Yeah, and I quite like how initially, you know, it's not a simple case of he comes out, sees the world's a ruin, and decides, fine, I'm just going to rule what's left. I mean, that's kind of how it ends up going, but it's not just a big, long jump just from one to the other. You know, there's plenty of steps in between, where initially he's kind of upset, kind of angry at the fact that everything's gone to hell. And then he spends some time just wandering around and exploring this new world and trying to get a grasp on what's left. One thing I always found absolutely hilarious about the Future Imperfect story is the fact that Rick Jones is still alive when this is supposed to be something like 100 years in the future, or close to that anyway. But Rick Jones is still not only alive, but still kind of... I don't know, if this guy was alive in this time setting, he'd be like 120 years old. So it's kind of funny that he's just still knocking around. But yeah, he is pivotal in bringing ultimately Bruce Banner into this story, the Hulk of the present, to fight the Maestro. So it's quite interesting to see what happens when he meets Maestro here for the first time, because initially Hulk's just really glad to see Rick in a world where nothing that he remembers is left. He meets his old friend and he's excited, but it becomes quickly apparent that at this point this Hulk is not the hero Hulk anymore. He's become very cynical, and he pretty much says, you know, there's no point in trying to be the hero anymore, trying to save people, because it was people who ruined this world to begin with. They don't deserve to be protected anymore. They need to be ruled over and controlled. And that's kind of the mindset that the Maestro ends up having. You know, he pretty much decides that he is the best person to rule over what's left of humanity and to control this city that he stumbles across. But he's got the little issue of taking over the original Maestro. So when he first comes here, the Hulk has got to fight somebody who's going by the name of Maestro, and it turns out to be Hercules, who is basically doing the same thing. He's a kind of despot ruler who is just abusing his power, his strength to control what's left, taking everything he wants for himself. And So initially, Hulk sets his sights on deposing Hercules and taking his place, basically. And I really liked all this because Hercules initially kicks his ass. You know, he just destroys Hulk. He's absolutely not ready for the fight. So then, and this is where the whole idea of him being, you know, like Professor Hulk, of him having his intelligence really comes into play, because he goes away and he is much smarter than Hercules, basically. So he comes up with a plan B, a really cool plan B, which ends up taking Hercules out. And then he sets his new plan in motion, where he goes about replacing him as the ruler of this place. I really liked it. So that's in that first part of the story. You pretty much get his rise to power in that sense. You see him become the Maestro. He takes the title for himself. He decides, you know, he's not going to create a new title. He says, Hercules was the Maestro, now I'm the Maestro. It's pretty much like that. And then we get into the second story here, War and Pax, kind of like part 2 of 3. I think these are 3 5-issue miniseries specifically, but they all tell one continuous story. And after his initial rise in that first one, then we get the next sections which focus on him consolidating and building his power, and building up his version of this city dystopia. What I really liked about this part of it specifically, this second miniseries, was the reintroduction of the Pantheon. Those characters again from Peter David's Hulk. My, you know, when reading that run, I think my favourite era of all of that is the 50 or so issues where Hulk's working with the Pantheon. I really enjoyed all that, so it was really cool to see those characters come back again, see what they're up to in this future. And again, sort of like when he meets Rick Jones again, when he reunites with him, Hulk, or Maestro is now, as he is now, the Maestro is really just kind of pleased to see these guys again, you know, because they were friends, you know, they worked together, lived together in their base of operations for a significant amount of time. So they first get together and they're just chatting again. But yeah, it kind of becomes the case that the Pantheon have pretty much decided that Hulk, as he is now, as the Maestro, he's too much of a threat. Hulk gets wind of the idea that they're planning to double cross him, and then they end up turning on each other. And again, it becomes a situation where Maestro's got to outfight them. And, well, let's say he manages to do it as well. Dr. Doom ends up coming into the story as well. That was really cool. Dr. Doom and Namor both come into this. Yeah, it's really cool. There's a lot more to this than I thought there was going to be when I first read it. I just thought it'd be quite a simple story. Didn't realise that Peter David was going to kind of pull out all the stops and write such a, well, I thought anyway, it was quite a fascinating story to explore the origin, the rise to power of Maestro. And the fight between Maestro and Doom is also really, really cool. I just think that's what makes Maestro so great, you know, because he's got the strength of the Hulk and the intelligence of Bruce Banner, you know, of himself. And that's such a deadly combination, you know. That's exactly why if the Hulk turned bad, it would be such a problem for everybody else. Yeah, it's really cool. And then this part, World War M, is the final mini-series of that whole story. This is where, again, Doom, initially beaten by Maestro, he goes away and schemes, teams up with Namor, and the Abomination as well gets involved in the story. Scenes here where Maestro goes down to Atlantis and confronts Namor. Like I say, just to repeat myself, but this was all really cool. You know, the artwork as well, which I've not really touched upon at any point throughout this, which I should have done really, but it's all really great. I mean, it's a different group of artists all working on this, but all really good artwork throughout each of these stories. Nothing really that I can say I disliked or criticised too much. And at the end of all this, what's really cool as well, I think, is that overall, what pretty much happens here is that this all neatly ties into the beginning of the original Future Imperfect. So pretty much where this story stops, it literally kind of ends here with Rick Jones putting the plan into motion, with the Maestro now firmly cemented on his throne and in power and in control. Rick Jones goes on with his plan to try and bring the past Hulk in and and obviously then from there the whole story unfolds as it does in Future Imperfect. So it all nicely leads into that story. It's really cool. Then there is this a couple of issues of Exiles, a series which has its fans. I'm not like a massive fan of it. Not that I dislike it. I've just never really read much Exiles. I just seem to read occasionally 1 or 2 issues of this series when it appears in something else, just like this. And like with the Spider-Man 2099 and the Captain Marvel stuff from earlier in the book, this again is another story where the Exiles are time hopping around, and they come into contact with the Maestro's world. And then I think the last thing in the book is this Abominations series, I think it's called. Yeah, the Abominations. And this again is set after Future Imperfect, and it features these kind of monstrous characters moving in on dystopia and sort of trying to fill the power void left by Maestro's downfall in that story. And that is pretty much that. Then there's quite a lot of bonus material in here though. So we'll take a quick look through that just whilst I sort of sum up and say that overall, I wouldn't say this is as strong, this group of material overall in this book as the main Peter David Hulk run. The stuff between Future Imperfect and then the big origin story, those 3 miniseries, a lot of that is kind of fun, but not amazing, not really great. Worth reading if you like the character, though. I mean, that's always pretty much the case, isn't it? I mean, if you're not really interested in the Maestro too much, then I would obviously say you don't need to pick this book up. I'd say probably read the original Future Imperfect story, and that's probably as much as you really need. But obviously, if you like myself and you really enjoy this character and you enjoy Peter David's writing as well in particular, then I think this is well worth it. It's a really cool book, and it's cool to have another kind of villain-focused omnibus. It's quite good that Marvel started doing these in the last few years, and I think that of those villain-specific focused omnibuses, this is probably, I'm a little bit biased here because again it's Hulk related. I love the Hulk. I love Peter David's Hulk specifically, but this is probably my favourite of all of those, and the one that I would say is a must-have if you're interested in them anyway. But a lot of different variant covers here. Seeing as I'm flicking through this, pretty good bonus section overall. A lot of different great artwork. Really cool covers here and different kind of character designs and sketches. But I think this is Herman Peralta, one of the artists on the mini-series. But yeah, all in all, just a really cool book. And as always, happy to hear the thoughts of others. For anybody who would like to kind of share their thoughts on this book, on Peter David's Hulk in general, always happy to hear what other people think of this stuff. But other than that, thanks as always for watching. Appreciate that as always. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.